Commander Coulter stood at the observation window of his ship, staring down at the small human colony below his vessel. The blue planet seemed so ordinary from this height, just another dot in a galaxy full of countless worlds. His species, the HFY, had long thought of humans as insignificant beings, their technology far less advanced than that of the HFY, their societies primitive and fractured. Yet here he was sent on a mission by his superiors to observe them and determine whether they posed any potential threat to the stability of the galaxy. He had been trained for this task, his mind sharp and disciplined, ready to assess any situation with precision, but he couldn't shake the curiosity that gnawed at him as he watched the planet below. The humans had a resilience about them, a certain spark that felt out of place when compared to the other species he had encountered. It was as if they had something that could not easily be measured by technology or raw power, something beyond the scope of his people's understanding. He knew the HFY had superior firepower and intelligence. They could conquer any planet with ease if they chose to, but they also understood that raw strength alone was not always enough to maintain control. Often it was the subtle nuances of a species that determined its true worth. Coulter's job was to find out what those nuances were for humans. From the view of the ship, he could see a settlement nestled among a sprawling field. The humans had managed to cultivate the land and build structures despite their primitive tools. The buildings were simple but functional, and there were signs of life everywhere. He could see children running through the open spaces, playing in ways that seemed almost alien to him. His species did not have such carefree behaviors. Everything was focused on the survival of the fittest, with no room for frivolity or weakness. His eyes locked onto one child standing alone in a field. The child appeared to be holding a small handheld device that glowed with a soft light. The human child was moving the device in strange patterns, as if interacting with some invisible force. Coulter adjusted the visual feed on his display, zooming in to observe the child more closely from this distance. The movement seemed almost random, but something about the child's intensity caught his attention. There was a concentration in the way the child interacted with the device that made him pause. It was as if the child was learning something complex far beyond the capacity of mere play. Coulter's mind raced. He had seen countless species across the galaxy, and yet he had never witnessed a child so focused on something so seemingly trivial. The simplicity of the toy was deceiving. He knew there must be more to it than just a game. The child's engagement seemed purposeful in a way that suggested this was no ordinary form of entertainment. For a brief moment, Coulter wondered if he was overestimating the significance of what he saw, but something deep within him whispered that this was worth investigating further. What was it about this human child that held such focus? How could something so simple hold such weight in the balance of the future? Coulter leaned forward in his seat and activated a secondary analysis feed, his eyes scanning the data for any clues. Something inside him told him this was just the beginning of something much more complicated than he had anticipated. The child continued to move the device in a fluid motion, a sense of purpose behind each gesture. Coulter observed closely, his mind analyzing every second of the child's movements. The device itself was small, perhaps a few inches across, and held in both hands, but it emitted a soft glow that shifted with each motion the child made. The light changed in patterns that were too precise to be random. Coulter had seen enough technology to recognize that this was not something that could be dismissed as a simple toy. From the way the child held the device, it seemed as if it was an extension of themselves. The movements were smooth but deliberate. There was no hesitation in the way the child manipulated it, as if they had done so 1,000 times before. Coulter's sensors zoomed in on the holographic projections that flickered in the air. Before the child's eyes, the images were shifting rapidly, some sort of environment taking form. Before him, Coulter could see the shapes of mountains, a river perhaps, and small moving figures that might be animals or people within the simulation. Coulter's curiosity grew as he watched the child adapt to the shifting virtual landscape without missing a beat. The child did not appear overwhelmed by the changes. Instead, the child seemed to thrive on the challenge, responding quickly to whatever the simulation threw at them. He had been trained to recognize leadership qualities in others, but this was different. This child was not simply playing a game. They were navigating a complex set of variables, adjusting strategies, and making decisions that would require the most sophisticated of minds to comprehend. Coulter's fingers hovered over his control panel as he attempted to access the simulation from his own position. The child's engagement was beyond the normal scope of play. This was a form of training not for entertainment, but for something more meaningful. The child's brow furrowed for a brief moment as the environment shifted yet again. Now the figures in the simulation seemed to be attacking the child's focus. Sharpened, the small hands began to move faster, and with a clearer purpose, Coulter's mind began to process what he was seeing. The child wasn't simply reacting. They were anticipating the next move of the virtual figures, calculating their paths, and devising solutions on the fly. The child seemed to have a grasp of strategy that defied their age. Coulter had seen generals of his own species make decisions with far less clarity in the face of conflict. The game unfolded like a battle. The child had to manage resources, organize the virtual people, protect them, and decide when to take risks or retreat to safety. It was a simulation designed to train problem-solving skills, and Coulter realized that what he had initially thought was a harmless pastime was actually far more than that. The child was learning something vital, something that would shape their understanding of the world and their place in it. Coulter's fingers moved across the controls again, and he focused his ship's sensors on the child's physical responses. He could track heart rate and other physiological indicators. Everything suggested that the child was fully immersed in the simulation, not just reacting but thinking and acting as though their very survival depended on the decisions they made in the moment. The implications of what he was seeing slowly began to settle in. The human child was playing the game, yes, but the game was teaching them skills that no one had anticipated. Even he himself had underestimated what was truly happening on the ground below. Coulter's eyes narrowed. He had to know more. Coulter's curiosity was now a burning need. He could not pull away from the child's every move. He had seen simulations before, but none like this. The child's mind was clearly operating on a level that Coulter had not expected from such a young being. He zoomed in further on the device the child was holding, trying to analyze its construction, but it was deceptively simple. There were no visible weapons or advanced tools. Nothing about it screamed of high technology, yet it was clearly producing a complex virtual environment that could adapt and evolve with the child's decisions. Coulter's mind raced as he thought of his own species and how they trained their warriors. The HFY had long relied on harsh simulations designed to test their strength, precision, and combat abilities from a young age. They were molded into instruments of war, but the HFY also valued intelligence and tactics, albeit in a rigid and controlled way. They were not taught to think in ways that constantly challenged them or pushed them to adapt to new situations. The HFY believed in structure and order, while humans seemed to thrive in chaos and unpredictability. He focused again on the child's interaction with the simulation. The environment was now changing drastically. The virtual world was no longer a simple game. It was a scenario that mirrored a full-scale crisis. The child was faced with a flooding river. The task was to move virtual people to safety, but the path was blocked by debris. The child didn't hesitate. Instead, the small hands moved quickly, selecting tools from the environment and using them to clear the path. The child had to make choices about how to allocate limited resources. At the same time, the child was constantly adapting to new challenges as the floodwaters rose and new obstacles appeared. Coulter zoomed in on the child's physiological responses. Once more, the heart rate remained steady. The child was not panicked, even though the situation in the simulation was dire. Instead, the child seemed to thrive under pressure, analyzing the scenario and responding with precision. The child's face was a picture of calm determination. Coulter had seen many battle-hardened soldiers and commanders in his time, but he had never seen someone so young handle such complexity with such grace and efficiency. The more Coulter observed, the more he realized that this wasn't just a game. It was a system of mental and emotional training designed to test a human's ability to think critically, make decisions under pressure, and work within the constraints of limited resources. The child was not simply reacting to events. The child was learning to lead, to adapt, to think on their feet in ways that would shape their entire future. The deeper Coulter's analysis went, the more impressed he became. Humans were not simply passive beings reacting to their environment. They were active participants, shaping it, creating solutions. Even in the most chaotic of circumstances, they could learn from their mistakes and improve their tactics in real time. This was something that HFY had never truly considered about humanity before. Coulter's mind began to shift. He had expected to find primitive creatures with no real potential, but what he saw now was something different. Humans were not weak, they were not easily dominated, they were learning, constantly evolving. And what was even more unsettling was that this child was just one example. There were millions more just like them, growing up with the same adaptability, the same drive to survive and innovate. The implications of this realization hit Coulter harder than any weapon he had ever faced. As Coulter continued to observe the child, it became impossible to ignore the growing sense of unease within him. The more he watched, the more he realized this was not a random occurrence. This was not an anomaly. It was a pattern. Humanity as a whole seemed to possess an innate ability to adapt, innovate, and overcome obstacles in ways that defied expectation, even in the face of overwhelming odds. The child in front of him was not just playing a game, they were learning the very essence of leadership and survival. The simulation had shifted again. The virtual floodwaters had receded, but now there was a new challenge. A series of virtual figures appeared on the horizon. Some seemed to be animals, others more human-like in appearance. The child had to choose how to respond. The figures seemed to be hostile, a threat to the virtual people. The child did not panic or hesitate. Instead, they took a deep breath and began to assess the situation. They knew that attacking blindly would waste precious resources, so the child began to strategize, choosing to set up defenses and then sending out small groups to gather additional resources from the surrounding environment. Coulter watched as the child expertly managed multiple variables. At once, the child wasn't simply trying to solve one problem, they were orchestrating a series of actions across the entire scenario, using both intelligence and creativity to craft a response to an ever-changing environment. The way the child made decisions was unlike anything Coulter had ever witnessed before. It was fluid yet calculated, instinctive yet deliberate. For the first time in Coulter's career, he began to question the assumptions that had guided his people for generations. The HFY had always prided themselves on their technological superiority, their ability to solve problems with raw power and efficiency. But what he saw before him was something far more dangerous than anything his species had ever faced. It wasn't just strength or intelligence. It was a combination of both and something more. It was a fundamental understanding of how to use limited resources and how to think creatively in moments of crisis. The child's movements remained steady. As they continued to navigate the simulation, the virtual figures moved closer, but the child's response was swift and effective, using their knowledge of the environment to outmaneuver and neutralize the threat without wasting unnecessary energy or resources. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was an effective one, and the child's score on the simulation continued to climb, showing the success of their strategy. Coulter's thoughts began to race. He could feel the growing realization settling in. Humans were not like any species he had encountered before. They did not rely solely on strength or technology to solve problems. They relied on their ability to think in new ways, to adapt quickly to unexpected circumstances. This child was not just learning to survive in a virtual world. They were learning to lead, to innovate, and to think on their feet in ways that no one had anticipated. In that moment, Coulter felt a strange sense of respect for the child. Despite the vast distance between his species and theirs, he saw the potential in this human child, a potential that could one day shape the future of not only humanity, but the galaxy itself. The realization hit him hard. He had been wrong about them, wrong about humans as a whole. They were not weak, they were not inferior, they were something far more complicated than he had imagined. The child's steady hand guided the simulation to its conclusion, and Coulter found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about the humans he had come to observe. Coulter knew he had to learn more. His curiosity had now turned to obsession. He had to understand how deep the human capacity for strategy and adaptability. When he couldn't just keep watching from a distance, he needed answers. He couldn't let his growing respect for the child cloud his judgment. He had a mission, and his superiors expected results. But he had also seen something in the child that could not be ignored, something that told him humans were not just another primitive species to be dismissed. They were evolving in ways that could threaten the HFY. He initiated a secure communication link, with his ship's intelligence unit tapping into the deeper archives on human history and training methods. What he found left him both impressed and stunned. Humanity's educational systems, though flawed, were unlike any he had encountered before. Their approach to learning was dynamic and deeply focused on creativity, critical thinking, and emotional intelligence. From a young age, humans were taught to solve problems in ways that required them to step outside conventional boundaries. They were not raised to simply follow orders. They were encouraged to question, challenge, and innovate. Coulter dug deeper, searching for more insights on how these methods applied to military training. Human forces had developed sophisticated techniques for conflict resolution and problem-solving. Despite their technological limitations, they had pioneered strategies based on flexibility and quick thinking. Rather than rigid planning and overwhelming force, humans thrived on unpredictability in a way the HFY could never have imagined. Their ability to adapt, their leadership, was based on a philosophy of growth through experience and learning from failure. Coulter found himself fascinated by the contrast between his own species' military doctrine and what he was seeing in the human approach. In particular, he focused on the simulation technology the child had used. It wasn't just a game, it was a multi-dimensional training tool designed to sharpen decision-making. Under pressure, Coulter had assumed it was a child's toy, something inconsequential. But the more he understood, the more he realized this was one of the cornerstones of the human way of thinking. They didn't just train to fight, they trained to lead, to make decisions that affected entire populations, to analyze and assess rapidly shifting circumstances without being overwhelmed by them. This was the root of their strength, and what set them apart from so many other species. Coulter began to see the humans in a new light. Their potential for growth was far beyond what his initial assessment had led him to believe. He had assumed their greatest strength was their survival instinct, but he now recognized that it was their ability to learn and adapt that made them formidable. It was this core skill that allowed them to overcome challenges that seemed impossible. With a deeper understanding of their training methods, Coulter made contact with human military officials. His tone was measured as he engaged in private discussions with high-ranking officers, seeking to learn more about how these systems operated. He asked probing questions about their tactics, about how they raised leaders among their people, and how they instilled the values of innovation and resilience in their forces. He was met with responses that were candid and honest, but still filtered through a sense of pride in their accomplishments. Coulter found that while humans spoke of the challenges they faced, they did not shy away from their successes. Either they had grown from their mistakes, and they had learned how to make themselves stronger with each step back. Through these conversations, Coulter began to see the larger picture. Humanity was not a species to be underestimated. They were not a threat because of their weaponry or technology. They were a threat because of their ability to think. Their adaptability, their capacity to evolve at a rapid pace, was what made them dangerous, not in the way he had originally thought, but in ways that were far more subtle and far more profound. Coulter felt a chill run through him as he realized just how little the HFY understood the true nature of humanity. Coulter spent the following days immersed in his research, his growing fascination with humanity taking him deeper into the intricacies of their culture and systems. The more he learned, the more he found himself questioning everything he had been taught about his own species' superiority. He had never considered how much humanity's ability to adapt could change the balance of power in the galaxy. He had assumed that strength and technology were the ultimate factors in determining a species' potential, but humans had shown him something he hadn't anticipated. They had the capacity to evolve rapidly, not just through technological advancement, but through mental and emotional resilience. Coulter's thoughts kept returning to the child, the way the small human had navigated the challenges of the simulation with such calm precision. The child wasn't just reacting to stimuli. They were thinking, critically evaluating every move and decision in a way that Coulter had seen only in the most experienced military strategists. Yet this child was still in the early stages of their life. Still so young, it was unsettling to think of what they could accomplish as they grew older if they continued down this path of growth and innovation. Coulter couldn't help but imagine how much more advanced humanity could become with time and with the right leadership. Coulter began to realize that humanity's true strength lay not in their technology or their weapons, but in their people. Each human seemed to possess an innate ability to overcome the odds, to adapt to new circumstances, and to learn from mistakes. They had an extraordinary resilience built into their very nature, and it was this resilience that made them unpredictable and dangerous. Humans weren't bound by the same limitations as other species. Their capacity for growth was practically limitless. He recalled the stories told among the HFY about humanity's early history, how they had survived against overwhelming odds. Their species had once been on the brink of extinction. Their planet had been ravaged by wars and environmental collapse, yet they had rebuilt themselves from the ashes. Coulter had always seen this as a simple tale of survival, but now he began to understand it for what it truly was: a testament to the human spirit. Their ability to pick themselves up after every defeat and come back stronger was perhaps the most dangerous aspect of their nature. He also began to see the parallels between the child's behavior in the simulation and the way humans had approached their own historical struggles. Each generation of humans seemed to be learning how to face adversity with increasing skill and innovation. They were not a species that had simply accepted their fate. They had faced down insurmountable odds time and time again, and had always found a way to turn the tide in their favor, even when others thought they would fail. Coulter's respect for humanity deepened, but so did his concern. He could no longer ignore the implications of what he had witnessed. The child was merely a glimpse into the future of their species. If they continued to develop at this rate, the HFY might find themselves facing a new kind of adversary, one that was capable of thinking on levels they had never considered before. The military strategies that HFY had relied upon for centuries would not be enough to defeat a species that could adapt as quickly as humans could. Coulter's thoughts were interrupted by a sharp ping on his console. It was a message from the HFY High Command. The Council had requested an update on his mission. Coulter paused for a moment before responding, knowing that he could no longer present the humans as an easy conquest as he had once intended. Coulter hesitated for a moment before transmitting the report to the High Command. His fingers hovered over the control panel. The message was a delicate balance. He could not reveal everything that had been unfolding in his mind for the past few days. If he did, he risked being dismissed as a fool, or worse, a traitor. His report had to convey the potential threat humanity posed without raising suspicion about his own growing respect for them. He had to tread carefully. The message was concise and to the point. He outlined humanity's resilience and adaptability, but stopped short of acknowledging the depths of his own analysis. He reported that the humans were indeed capable of growth beyond their current technological standing, but he also emphasized that they lacked the military sophistication to present an immediate danger to the HFY. In the short term, Coulter portrayed them as a species still in their infancy when it came to true warfare, but one that could potentially pose a threat in the distant future if left unchecked. Once the transmission was sent, Coulter leaned back in his chair, his thoughts racing. He had done his duty, but something gnawed at him deep within his mind, a growing discomfort with the conclusions he had drawn. The more he had studied humans, the more he understood how fundamentally different they were from the HFY. They were not simply a species to be dominated. They were a species to be respected, feared. Even their potential was something that could not be dismissed. Coulter knew that if the HFY were to act against humanity, it had to be done carefully, strategically. They couldn't simply overwhelm them with force the way they had done with other civilizations in the past. The humans had the ability to learn and adapt at a rate that was far beyond what the HFY had anticipated. He had seen it in the child, the way the young human had approached every challenge with a sharp mind and a calm determination. It was the same resilience that had allowed humanity to survive against the odds in the past and would allow them to survive in the future. The more Coulter thought about it, the more he realized that humanity's strength was not just in their individual brilliance, but in their collective willpower. As well, each human seemed to be a part of something larger than themselves, something that drove them to continue pushing forward, no matter the cost, no matter the setback. They were a species that would fight to the end for their survival, and that made them dangerous in ways that HFY had never fully understood. Calter began to take his observations more seriously. He started seeking out human commanders in secret, attempting to learn more about their leadership structures and how they managed their forces, how they dealt with crisis situations. What made them so resilient in the face of overwhelming odds? He asked subtle questions about their strategies, their history, their training methods, and began to understand that it wasn't just about survival. It was about growth. They had learned to turn adversity into an opportunity for development, something that Calter had never been taught to value in his own society. He saw now that humanity's greatest weapon was not in their technology or their weapons, it was in their minds and their hearts. It was their ability to evolve their ideas, their solutions, and even their spirit. As a species, they had the capacity to change in ways that the HFY could not predict. They were unpredictable in ways that could throw even the most carefully laid plans into chaos. Calter could no longer ignore it. Humanity was not a species to be underestimated, and he now found himself questioning the very mission he had been given. Calter stared at the data streams in front of him. The transmission had been received by High Command, but his mind was far from the official report that had been sent. The weight of what he had learned about humanity pressed down on him. Every new piece of information had only deepened his understanding of just how different they were from what the HFY had assumed. Their growth, their adaptability, their ability to overcome challenges and change was unlike any species he had encountered before. He realized now that he could not simply return to his people and present them with the same old assessment of humanity. They were no longer just a primitive species in need of domination. They were something far more complex. Calter knew his report would likely be scrutinized by those who held the power over his future in the HFY hierarchy, but he was no longer certain he could follow the directives of his superiors without questioning them. Humanity was not to be feared in the way his people had been taught they should fear them. It was not their weapons that made them dangerous, but their potential to evolve and adapt at a rate that could outpace any effort to suppress them. His thoughts drifted back to the child, the way they had navigated the simulation with such skill and insight, the way they had solved problems with creativity and precision. It had been a game, but it was also a lesson. Humanity was teaching its young to think critically, to act quickly, to lead in moments of crisis. Calter could not shake the thought that these children would grow up to be far more formidable than anyone could imagine. If the galaxy did not recognize the true nature of humanity's strength, they would be caught off guard when it was too late. Calter's mind turned toward his mission objectives. The purpose for his observation was clear. High Command had intended to assess whether humanity was a threat to the stability of the galaxy, but now he found himself asking if the real question was not whether humanity was a threat, but how the HFY should engage with them moving forward. How could they coexist with a species so capable of change and growth without seeing them as a potential enemy to be conquered, but as a force that could one day challenge everything the HFY believed to be true? He thought of his people, their culture, their focus on control and dominance. They had never needed to change the way they thought because they had never been challenged in the way humanity could challenge them. They had never had to adapt in the same way humanity had. Their species had always relied on strength and fear to maintain their position in the galaxy, but that would no longer be enough, not with what humanity could become. Calter realized now that the real threat was not just from human weapons or armies, but from the way they could reshape their world and their future. With every generation, the potential for change was limitless in a way that had never occurred to him before. Humanity had the power to challenge the established order, not just in terms of war or politics, but in the very fabric of galactic society, and he wasn't sure the HFY were ready for that kind of disruption. The transmission he had sent would likely bring no immediate change, but it was a beginning. Calter knew his mission was far from over. The questions he had raised would lead to more questions, and soon there would be no ignoring the truth. Humanity's potential for growth could no longer be overlooked. It would change everything, and Calter could only hope that when the time came, the HFY would be prepared to face this new reality before it was too late.